From Samborough Head, the mainland stretches northward in a long, narrow strip in which is some of the best farming land of the islands. The valleys and hillsides are dotted with numberless small crofts, which are the sheet anchor of Shetland life. But it is in the sheltered bays along the coast that can be found the key to Shetland prosperity. For like his Norse ancestors, the Shetlander is a seafaring man before all else, and fishing is the staple industry of the island.
It started off with drift net fishing, and that's a type of fishing that's been practiced for many, many years. It was practiced before the war, and at the back of the war, then it was started up again. It was temporarily stopped during the war or run down anyway, very few boats. And since the war, it's built up a fairly large fleet.
Lerwick's main claim to importance is as a herring fishing centre, of which it is the largest on the British Isles. The season is only a short one and is practically restricted to the month of June.
Well, I have a nostalgic feeling about the drift net boats particularly. And a whole lot of Shetlanders did, because the atmosphere created by the drift netters was different from any other type of fishing. Well, in the summer months when it all happened, Lerwick population would be doubled. And I met somebody quite recently who said that when she heard the tune South of the Border that was popular just before the last war, then she said she could just see the scene at the herring stations, and she could hear the coopers hammering their barrels and hear the banter of young people all together. And somehow we thought it would never end.
Oh, they were great days. Lerwick and in the country places too, because there were herring stations dotted all around Shetland. But in Lerwick, all the way along the harbour, everything was just alive. The freshers would come, the barrel boats would come, the salt boats, and you could almost walk the Bressie on the drifters before they put to sea. There were so many in. And then following the fleet, of course, there would be fisher girls from the Western Isles and Ireland and down in Scotland, and the street vendors and the street musicians.
Older men looked for signs of herring. That was a different thing. There was no meters then, no sonars, nothing, no electronics of any kind. A wheelhouse then was just a compass and a wheel to steer by, and that was all there was. But, well, there were several signs they looked for. They looked for grease on the water, the colour of the water, the direction of wind for different places, different tides and all that. It was just experience, I suppose.
At last, the skipper decides to shoot the nets. Maybe the herring are here, maybe another 10 miles out.
There was whales around then, small whale, and I don't know really what type of whale it was. We called it a herring hog.
Herring hog is a monkey whale, and they seem to be very interested in the herring shoals.
After the war, the Norwegians were fairly active with the fishing of that whale, and we didn't like to see them, but they did come around and would lie beside us when we were lying at the nets, wait till we started to haul, and with the herring coming out of the nets, the whale was always, not always, but sometimes round, eating that herring, and of course they shot them.
You always saw the herring hog, and that was one of the sights that the fishermen used to watch for when they were setting nets. They wanted to see the fulmar, and they wanted to see the sea a nice green colour, the plankton, of course, you see. And they wanted to see a couple of herring hogs in the area. They watched everything, of course, the gannets dive, and they knew the traditional places to expect to find herring. They wanted to see all the signs too before they would set a net. For the drift netting, they had to fool the herring by setting the nets at dusk and letting them swim through them.
And now, with the light at the masthead and the nets trailing out, the boats drift with the tide. About 1 a.m., the skipper decides to haul the nets. With about 50 cran on board, 9 tons of herring. The old traditional craft and wisdom and luck have filled the hold. Now it's full steam ahead for the market.
Drift netting went on till about the early 1960s, when a fleet of pursnet boats appeared from the eastward, a Viking invasion as it were.
Yes, it was very dramatic actually, because it was almost overnight that it happened, without warning actually. And the first that I heard about it was earwigging again on the marine band, because the fishermen used to call in their homes. It was all very different then, and they didn't mind giving their positions or anything. And they called their homes to say how many crans they'd had. And I came in on a couple of skippers, and something really dramatic had happened. One could tell, but they couldn't get a gist of what it was. But before long it emerged that 200 Scandinavian pursnetters had arrived unexpected on the grounds. That's just on the territorial limit, you see, to the east of Shetland. Now, if they were ordinary boats, it was quite dramatic. But what they were new boats. They were about 100 feet, which is about twice the length of the fleets here, you see, fishing the herring, were all the way down to Yarmouth. I mean, it wasn't just Shetlanders. And so they were big boats. And they had this Aztec, as they called it then, it's the sonar, I understand. So they weren't restricted to the darkness and having to fool the herring and put your wits against the herring. They could fish all the day round. And then they had this huge nets. I mean, it was lifted by hydraulic block, and nobody had ever seen that before. Because the worst of the herring fishing was the hard work hauling the wet nets. And it was just dramatic in every way. And they proceeded to give the British herringmen an absolute lesson in how to catch herring. And it was estimated at the end of this, Shetland was agog about this, of course, and it was estimated at the end of the season that the Scandinavian pursnetters had caught nearly 200,000 tons, while the British contingent had caught 10,000. So you see, it was just the beginning of the total end of drift netting.
Not just the end of drift netting, but the end almost of the herring itself. Its stocks were so depleted that for 6 years there was a ban on netting. Old Shetland institutions were devastated, from the sand eels on which so many of the seabird colonists depended, to the skills and knowledge which generations of fishermen had developed. The trawlers sucked up the whole ecosystem.
Shetland wool was reckoned to be the finest in the world. It was very, very fine, and when it was spun, the finest thread you could spin, you could knit a shawl out of it and draw that shawl through a wedding ring.
The tough island sheep used to spend the summer up on the hills and come down into the croft pasturelands in winter, to the benefit of almost everything that lived in both habitats.